Well, we're going to read the Bible. If you have a Bible, please do turn to John chapter 14. John chapter 14. It's page 1134. If you're using one of our church Bibles, it will be on the screen behind me. I'm going to read these words, then we'll sing, and then Andy's going to come and speak. Let me read this to you. These are the words of Jesus. He says to his disciples, "Do not let your hearts be troubled. Trust in God, trust also in me. In my Father's house are many rooms. If it were not so, I would have told you. I am going there to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come back and take you to be with me, that you also may be where I am. You know the way to the place where I am going." Thomas said to him, "Lord, we don't know where you are going, so how can we know the way?" Jesus answered, "I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. If you really knew me, you would know my Father as well. From now on, you do know him and have seen him." Philip said, "Lord, show us the Father, that will be enough for us." Jesus answered, "Don't you know me, Philip, even after I have been among you for such a long time? Anyone who has seen me has seen the Father. How can you say, 'Show us the Father'? Don't you believe that I am in the Father and that the Father is in me? The words I say to you are not just my own. Rather, it is the Father living in me who is doing his work. Believe me when I say that I am in the Father and the Father is in me, or at least believe on the evidence of the miracles themselves. I tell you the truth, anyone who has faith in me will do what I have been doing. He will do even greater things than these because I am going to the Father. And I will do whatever you ask in my name, so that the Son may bring glory to the Father. You may ask me for anything in my name, and I will do it."
Okay, well, good evening once again, and great to see so many of you. And boy, is it warm in here this evening. This is fantastic, and puts the pressure on me because I realise that the longer I speak for, the more likely you are to fall asleep. So probably sometime around about the 80th minute of the sermon, you'll be killing over. You think I'm joking? But the topic I really wanted to talk to you about this evening was this morning, for those of you who are here, we looked at the whole question of responding to atheism. And this evening, I really want to look at the whole question of how we respond to those who sort of say, you know, what's unique about Jesus? I mean, there are lots of religious options out there. Why can't I just pick the one that works for me? And to kind of set the scene for where I want to go this evening, the story is told of a university student who was looking for a job. It was the summer, and he wanted to find some work. And he was leafing through the jobs section of the local newspaper, excuse me, and he found an advert from the local town zoo. And the advert was a bit vague, but the salary they were offering was pretty impressive. So he rang up and booked an interview. Now, when he got to the interview, he discovered why the advert was a little bit mysterious, because it turns out that the zoo had a slightly peculiar job they were looking to fill. It turned out their star attraction, a gorilla, had died just a few days earlier, and they hadn't got the money for a new gorilla. So what they wanted was someone to dress up in a gorilla suit and act the part. Now, very strange job, but the money was good, and it was a lovely gorilla suit. So he signed on the line, took the job. First day of the job, it was pretty easy. He walked around the gorilla enclosure, and, you know, tourists gathered, people took photographs, nobody was any the wiser. But boy, was it boring. So on day 2, he decided he would raise the stakes slightly. He began leaping around the gorilla enclosure, you know, roaring and beating his chest, and the crowds grew bigger, camera phones flashed, people even threw peanuts and M&Ms. It's fantastic. But still, yeah, a little bit boring. So on day 3, he noticed that hanging in the middle of the gorilla enclosure was a creeper, was a vine. And he grabs hold of this vine and he begins swinging to and fro, roaring as fiercely as he can. The crowds were wowed. The crowds grew bigger. There was more camera flashes, more peanuts. It was amazing. And the crowd screamed. He flew higher. They screamed louder. He flew and swung higher and higher until suddenly the creeper he was swinging on snapped. And he flew in a graceful parabolic arc out of the gorilla enclosure and landed in a crash in the lion enclosure next door. He comes around from the mild concussion to see a large, angry-looking lion advancing on him. You know, muscles rippling beneath its silky fur, saliva dripping from every tooth. So in panic, he begins to cry out to the crowds, "Help, help! I'm just a man in a suit. Somebody please save me." Well, in one fluid motion, the lion leaps, it jumps, it springs, it pins him to the floor. And then it says in a fierce whisper, "Shut up! You'll get us all fired!" The things that happen in Southampton. Now, the reason I tell that story, not just for a cheap laugh, is that many people think that all the religions of the world are a bit like the animals in that story. That, outwardly they may look different, like lions and gorillas and tigers and whatnot, but underneath they are exactly the same. And many people think that's what's going on with religion. Yeah, Christians and Buddhists and Hindus and Muslims and whatnot may look a bit different, but surely it's all the same underneath. And of course, we live in this extremely pluralistic world right now. In many of our major cities here in the UK, and even some of our smaller towns and cities, you can choose from all kinds of different religions and belief systems, right? I grew up in London, South London, hence the accent, and where I grew up in, the part of South London I grew up in, you could choose from hundreds of different ideologies. Where I grew up in London, you could choose from Islamism, Hinduism, Buddhism, Sikhism, Judaism, Jainism, secularism, humanism, atheism. You could even be a Crystal Palace FC fan. We call that masochism. All those different ideologies. And given that wealth of religious choice, no wonder that some secular people and some people in other traditions, faith traditions, look at Christians and say, "You are arrogant. You Christians are arrogant, you're bigoted, you're intolerant," because of this insistence on the idea that there is something unique about the God of the Bible and Jesus. Wouldn't it be much more tolerant, much more inclusive, much more welcoming to say all the religions are just the same, to give everybody a kind of group hug, and to stop speaking about the uniqueness of Christianity? Aren't all religions basically the same? Is one of the most common questions I get when I speak on places like university campuses. Now, what I'd like to do this evening is, before we get to this passage in John's Gospel that was just read to us, I want to dig a little bit deeper into this claim, all religions are the same. Because there are actually two very different types of person who say all religion is essentially the same. Two different types of people make that claim, and the first might surprise you. The first type of person who says that all religions are essentially the same are my atheist friends. You see, if you are an atheist, it's fairly straightforward. All religions are equal because all religions are equally wrong. If you are an atheist, it doesn't matter whether you are talking to a Buddhist, a Baptist, or a Baha'i, they are bonkers. They are all wrong, they are all mad, and religion is simply dangerous nonsense, no matter which flavour it comes in. One of the most influential atheists of recent years was Christopher Hitchens. And he died a few years ago, but Chris wrote a best-selling book called God Is Not Great. It sold millions of copies, so even though Christopher didn't believe in God, his bank manager gave thanks every day. And Christopher's book, it's an amazing book, and it makes some amazing statements, and he writes very powerfully. And one of the things he says in that book is he coins this little phrase, religion poisons everything. And why would he say that? Well, would say Christopher and many other atheists I meet, religion causes war. Religion causes tribalism, it causes intolerance, it causes exclusion, it causes all kinds of societal evils. It probably even causes bad breath. Religion poisons everything. In fact, another very famous atheist, Richard Dawkins, had a documentary on Channel 4 a few years ago called The Root of All Evil. And that was his TV documentary about religion. So for atheists, all religions are the same. They are dangerously, dangerously bad. Now, of course, there are some problems with this view. If Christopher were with us this evening, he's not, he's no longer with anybody, sadly, having died a few years ago. But if Christopher were here this evening, my first thing I'd want to say to him is the problem with this statement is it's lazy. It's lazy because all religions in the world are actually quite different. A lot of the violence in the world and extremism that's coming right now from religion is coming from one religion in particular. It's not Buddhists who are causing problems right now in many parts of our world. So religions are quite different. In fact, Buddhism, actually, for many Buddhists, they don't believe in a God. So to lump them in with Jews and Christians and Muslims is a very strange thing to do. In fact, to say all religion is evil is rather like saying all authors are stupid. It's a very lazy thing to say. Sure, some authors are stupid and some books are bad, but there are some lovely authors and some wonderful books. It's a lazy statement. But the second problem with this idea that religion poisons everything, that Hitchens has popularized and others have picked up on, this charge that religion lies behind all the evils of the world, is it's very sloppy because you could say the same thing about many other things. So take this little statement he wrote, religion poisons everything. What would happen if we swapped out the noun at the front of that sentence? For example, we might say, well, instead of religion poisons everything, we might say politics poisons everything. Politics causes division and hatred and arguments on Twitter and all kinds of things. We might argue politics poisons everything. I think we could make that case. Or what about money? Money causes crime, and money causes greed, and money causes jealousy and resentment. Money poisons everything. And if we had time, we could put other words into that sentence. You see, the problem is that atheists like Christopher Hitchens have built his belief system, his worldview, on the idea that human beings are basically getting better, that human beings are basically good, that the world is getting better. It's a kind of naive utopianism. But the world isn't like that. The world is a pretty complicated place, and it seems to be the case that human beings are the weak link. It seems to be the case that everything we lay hold of as human beings, we can use for great good, or we can use for great evil. We can use money for great good, we can use money for evil. We can use politics for good, we can use politics for evil. We can use religion for good, and we can use religion for evil. The problem is not with money, or politics, or even religion. The problem is not out there somewhere. The problem is in here somewhere. It's the human heart, as Scripture says, is deceitful above all things. In fact, one of the people I think who noticed this and described this the most succinctly is the Russian writer Alexander Solzhenitsyn. He was a Russian novelist and a political activist. He was imprisoned by the Soviets for his political activism and actually became a Christian while imprisoned in the gulags. But he wrote an incredibly big book about his experience imprisoned by the Soviets, and he reflects on the human condition. And in the middle of his book, The Gulag Archipelago, he could easily have slagged off communism. He could have said the problem with the world is communism, or the problem with the world is politics. But a man who had experienced arrest and torture and persecution for his political beliefs, this is what he concludes about what's gone wrong with the world. He wrote the dividing line between good and evil. The dividing line between good and evil passes not between classes, nor between political parties even, but it passes right through the middle of every human heart and all human hearts. In other words, all of us can be angelic and all of us can be monstrous. And in other words, what we need then, what the world needs as an answer to violence and injustice and all the things that we see wrong with the world is not a clever philosophy, not a snarky little atheist sound bites, not more politics, not more money, not more education. None fundamentally change the world. What we need is transformation of the human heart, which just possibly Jesus might have said a few things about that we'll come to in a few moments. But, so atheists think that all religions are the same, and I think we've said a few things about that. But there's another group of people, before we come to John 14, who think that all religions are the same, and that's our pluralist friends. Pluralists are people who believe that all religions are essentially the same. I had a friend who was a pluralist, described himself this way in Toronto. He was a university professor, and he would constantly come out with the refrain, all religions are the same, all religions are the same, everything, it doesn't matter what you believe, if God exists, and if God is an equal opportunities employer, then God, he or she, my friend Jeff would use that kind of language, will welcome everybody who's a sincere seeker, and so on and so forth. And he used to get very annoyed. In fact, he called me a fundamentalist as one of his lovely labels for me, because I would insist that Jesus and Jesus alone might have had some things to say. Now, as I've sort of thought about people like my friend Jeff and others in our culture who want to tell you that all religions are essentially the same, I've thought over the years about why that is, what's driving that. And I think it's the idea that for many people, if God exists, then all religions are essentially the same thing. If God exists, God is out there in the clouds, the fog somewhere. We can't possibly know what God is like because we are human beings and God is God. And so religion just represents humankind's best guess at figuring out what God is like. And if religion is just your best guess at figuring out what God is like, it would be incredibly arrogant for me to say that my best guess is somehow superior to your best guess. In fact, there is a story that pluralists often like to tell to illustrate this. Some of you may have heard this before. It's an old Indian story called the story of the blind men and the elephant. And it goes like this. There was once a wise Indian king who brought into his throne room an elephant, and presumably a large shovel, just in case, and also 4 blind men. And the blind men never encountered an elephant before, so he sort of said to them, go and, have a feel of the elephant, and tell me what you think an elephant's like. Well, the first blind man grabbed hold of the elephant's trunk and gave it a tug, and he went, an elephant. An elephant is like a snake. Well, the second blind man stumbles into one of the elephant's legs and sort of feels around a bit, and he goes, you're mad, you're completely wrong. An elephant is like a tree. And the third blind man goes around to the back of the elephant and has a sort of tug on the tail, and he goes, I don't know what you guys are smoking, because an elephant is like a rope. And the fourth blind man stumbles into the sort of side of the mighty beast, and he said, you three are utterly ignorant. An elephant is like a wall. How stupid can you be? And they began arguing and fighting, and soon blows were being traded. And meanwhile, the king, up on his throne, on the stage at the front of the throne room, just looked at this and laughed and laughed and laughed. And you could see the point of the parable, right? If each of the blind men had merely realized that he just had one small part of the elephant, just part of a much bigger truth, and they compiled their knowledge together, they would have had a much better understanding of reality, and it would have been much more peaceful. And so the story goes, if only religions did this. If only Jews and Christians and Buddhists and Hindus and Jedis, the 90,000 people who wrote Jedi on the last UK census, all kind of went, we've got part of the elephant, then wouldn't the world be a more peaceful place? But there is, of course, a problem with the story. Who is the most arrogant person in that fairy tale? It's not any of the blind men. Oh, the king. Thank you, ma'am. Yes, I always hope somebody will actually, interact. Yes, it's the king, right? Because it's the king who's standing up there going, I know everything. I can see the entire elephant, and the 4 of you are all ignorant. And the person, in other words, who sits there and goes, if only you religious people could realize you've all only got part of the truth, how incredibly arrogant. It's the pluralist who's sitting up there saying, if only all those Christians and all those Muslims and all those Jews and all those Hindus and all those Buddhists, if only they were as enlightened as I was, they would see that actually there's a much bigger truth. It is outrageously arrogant. It's also a flawed parable because it assumes that the only way we can not have knowledge about God is sort of fumbling there in some half-hearted kind of have a best guess kind of way. But of course, my friends, that is not the claim of Christianity, right? I hope nobody is here who is a Christian this evening who, if we asked you why, would say, well, I kind of, stuck a pin in a board, or I had a best guess and Christianity came up nicely, or I heard the food was good here at these, evening services, so I thought I'd stick my pin in the Christian card. Christianity is not a best guess. Christianity is instead about this incredible claim that we haven't sort of figured out what God is like, but that rather God in his love has reached out and reached down to us. As the New Testament says elsewhere in the Gospel of John, in 2 of perhaps the most famous verses in the New Testament, for God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, so that whoever believes in him shall not die, but have eternal life. God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but to save the world through him. Which brings us, by way of a rather long introduction, to the person of Jesus. And I always find that the thing about Jesus is he is an absolutely fascinating figure. One of the things I often say when speaking to secular audiences is no matter what you believe about Jesus, you cannot ignore the fact he had tremendous influence. For example, if you were to make 2 lists, and on one list you were to write the names of the most influential people in history, and on the other list you were to write the names of people who had claimed to be God, only one name would appear on both those lists, and that would be Jesus of Nazareth. Even people who attacked Christianity with vigor and energy hugely respect Jesus. In his book, God is Not Great, Christopher Hitchens says that he admires the virtue of Jesus' teaching. I meet many atheists who, though they may have no time, they tell me, for Christianity, they find something interesting and enigmatic and attractive about Jesus. Many who have read the Gospels, that is their kind of experience. And of course, the question, do all religions lead to God, takes on an especially sharp focus when we look at the person of Jesus. It's easy to talk about God in the abstract, but when we look at Jesus, things get very interesting, right? Because Jesus said some outlandish things that, were he not who he claimed to be, would be rather questionable. You know, people often try and label Jesus as just a wise teacher and just another good person, you know, maybe a teacher of morals and so on and so forth, and the kind of person who emphasized we should all love one another and hug kittens and rainbows and whatnot. But Jesus doesn't seem to fit that mold very well. The famous Christian writer C.S. Lewis wrote these incredibly famous words in the middle of the 20th century. He wrote, "A man who is merely a man and said the sort of thing that Jesus said would not be a great moral teacher. He would either be a lunatic on a level with the man who says that he is a poached egg, or else he would be the devil of hell. You must make your choice. Either this man was and is the Son of God, or else a madman, or else something worse. You can shut him up as a fool, you can spit at him and kill him as a demon, or you can fall at his feet and call him Lord and God, but let us not come up with any of this patronizing nonsense about him being a great human teacher. He has not left that open to us. He did not intend to." Pretty strong language. So what kind of things did Jesus say that Lewis had in mind, and how do they relate to this "do all religions lead to God" question? Well, in the middle of our reading we had this evening, there is a prime example, candidate number one, that I think would fall into this category of things that Jesus said that are pretty outrageous were he not the Son of God. Jesus said in John 14, verse 6, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to God the Father except through me." And of course, here we hit the problem of exclusivity head on. You know, the way, the truth, and the life. My secular skeptical friends would say, you know, it'd be okay if you were saying Jesus was a way, or, you know, perhaps a version of the truth, or perhaps one way to find life, but the only way? This is quite an outrageously exclusive passage. And what I found helpful when I sort of share this text with people who are not Christians, who sometimes react with horror at just how outrageous Jesus appears to be in what he says here, is to take this little verse and just break it down into these three claims: way, the truth, and the life, and perhaps see what Jesus meant by each of them. And that's what I'd like to do in the remaining sort of time this evening. Just take about 5 minutes, or maybe even less, on each of them, one by one. So let's begin with the first part of Jesus' statement here. I am the way. What does it mean to say that Jesus is the way in a world of all these other religions that we've talked about this evening? Well, what's interesting, all other religions, without fail, are based on one of three ways. There have been people who've studied world religions, and this is a very common scheme that people come up with. All the religions that we've looked at in the world as academics really fall quite neatly into one of three categories. There are religions based on knowledge. You have to know the right thing. There are religions based on experience. You have to have the right kind of mystical experience. Many Eastern religions are based like that. And then there are religions based upon pragmatism, on action. You have to do the right thing. So most of the world's religions, you have to know the right thing, experience the right thing, or do the right thing. What is interesting is many people have noticed that Christianity is the one kind of exception. It doesn't really fit this grid. Jesus didn't come claiming to give us new information. Jesus didn't say, the main reason I've come is to teach you some wonderful new teachings, and if you master these, everything will be wonderful. Jesus didn't come saying, here's a wonderful new religious experience, folks, you need to have it. And he didn't come saying, hey, here's a great long list of things to do, and if you just keep these commandments along with the original 10, everything will be wonderful. Rather, Jesus came claiming to reveal God himself to us. And that makes Jesus unique among the founders of all the world's religions. In fact, to reinforce this idea, it's been observed that you could take the founder of any of the other world religions out of history, and they could still stand. So, for example, if the Buddha had never been born, somebody else could have started the religion we now know as Buddhism, could have taught the same things the Buddha taught, and maybe, for example, I could have started Buddhism, and it would be called Andyism, and there'd be fat little statues of me in green jade all across mantelpieces in Asia. But it would be the same basic religion. It didn't need Buddha. Same with Islam. If Muhammad had never been born, somebody else could have taught and preached what is now written down in the 114 chapters of the Quran. And Muslims are very clear on this point. Muhammad was just a man through whom they believe the Quran was revealed. You could take him out of history, and Allah, the God of Islam, could have sent the Quran with somebody else. But Jesus, on the other hand, well, Christianity is not a set of teachings or an experience or some moral examples taught by Jesus. Christianity is Jesus Christ. In fact, as somebody once remarked, if you take Christ out of Christian, all you are left with are the letters I, A, and N. And Ian cannot help you. Christianity is Christ. If your name is Ian here this evening, I do apologize for what I've just done to your ego. Second, I am the way. Begin with second, I am the truth. Again, this sounds horribly arrogant in a world of other religious truth claims. How arrogant of Jesus to claim to be the only one who taught the truth. But hang on a moment. Jesus says something quite interesting here. He's not just saying, I am teaching the truth, but I am the truth. But furthermore, I wonder if you've noticed, of course, that every truth claim is exclusive. The moment you say that 2 plus 2 is 4, you are excluding the mathematically challenged who think that it's 7, 9, or 437. Every truth claim is by its nature exclusive. That shouldn't surprise us that Jesus uses this strong language. But as I say, it is interesting that Jesus didn't say, I know the truth or I teach the truth, but I am the truth. Now, what's interesting is the Greek word translated into English as the truth, and the New Testament originally written in Greek, of course. The Greek word in John 14, verse 6 here is the Greek word aletheia, and it literally means to unhide, to reveal, to take that which is hidden and bring it out into the light where everybody can see it. So Jesus is claiming to be the one who unhides, the one who reveals, the one who shows that which is hidden. So the natural question would be, what does Jesus reveal? Well, firstly, I would suggest Jesus reveals who God is. The New Testament consistently says, if you want to know what God is like, look at Jesus. But I don't think it stops there, because the other claim that Jesus consistently makes is that he is the one who reveals who we are. He is the one who can see into our hearts. He is the one who can see what we are really like behind the masks that we wear to hide the real us from other people and indeed from ourselves. And what I find interesting is most human beings find the idea of having the truth about who they are revealed that makes them very uncomfortable. We're very good at human beings about hiding things away and not revealing who we really are. And I would suggest that even the most richest, most self-assured, most self-confident person you've ever met actually has skeletons in the cupboard, things they would never want revealed in public. And when I do the evangelistic version of this talk on things like university campuses, I love to use the following illustration to make people a little bit uncomfortable. And it goes like this. It says, imagine that you, after this service, you walked out of the church and you didn't look as you crossed the road, and you got flattened by a local pastor roaring past in his large BMW X5. And I don't know who that could be, Phil. Who could that be? And anyway, you're killed instantly. And then you come round from the shock and discover yourself at the pearly gates in heaven. And an angel welcomes you, an angel with a clipboard, welcomes you and looks you up and goes, oh, welcome, welcome to heaven. We've been looking forward to your arrival for a long time. Follow me. And he takes you by the hand and he leads you into what appears to be a multi-screen cinema. And he leads you into screen number 2, and you're the only person there, it's completely empty, and he leads you down to the front row, and he positions you in a seat right in the front row, gives you a large box of popcorn, and says, welcome to the Theatre of Judgment. We do hope you enjoy the following presentation. And he disappears in a puff of whatever it is angels disappear in, fairy dust or something. And on the screen appears a movie. And it's the movie of your life. Everything you've ever said and thought and done. All the good stuff, all the bad stuff, the heroic moments, the awful moments, even your most private, most intimate thoughts that you've never shared with anybody, all up there in glorious Technicolor. Some bits are so amazing you want to stand on the chair and go, yes! Other bits are so bad you want to hide under the seat in front of you, but the angels put you in the front row, so that's not going to happen. And finally, after about 3 hours, you scrape yourself off the floor and the angel reappears in a puff of whatever it is angels appear in, fairy dust or whatever. And he says, I hope you enjoyed that. Hope you enjoyed that. I've got some good news, by the way. We're going to have a second showing. That was the premiere. We're going to have a second showing because outside the doors in the lobby, we've gathered everybody else who appeared in that movie. All of your friends, all of your neighbours, your dear old granny, all the people you know, everybody, friends, enemies, neighbours, colleagues, everybody who appeared, people you thought things about, said things about, they're going to come in here and watch the movie of your life with you. Hey, what do you think? How many people here would want that? How many people here would go, oh my good grief, please, anything but my dear old granny? Because all of us know that we have things deep down in the corners of our imagination, the kind of darker corners of our heart, things that we've thought or said or done that we want no kind of spotlight shed upon. And Jesus doesn't let us get away with that. He says he's come to reveal the truth about who we really are. There is no hiding place. And that can be profoundly uncomfortable because before you can receive the cure, you have to accept the diagnosis. But remember what the Bible said back in John 3, verse 17. God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but to save the world through him. Jesus' ministry is not all about going, you bunch of total rotters, and making us wallow in our misery and then disappearing off and leaving us. That's not why Jesus came. But before he can do what he came for, he needs to expose who we're really like. And that brings us then to that third claim that Jesus made, I am the life. See, Christianity is not about some massive guilt trip. I know Christians have sometimes given that impression. I often meet non-Christians who've got it into their head that Christianity is just about feeling guilty and just about feeling miserable, and Christians go to church on Sunday so they can feel misery together, eat terrible snacks and then go home. But Christianity is not about some massive guilt trip. It's not about Christians being people who point to the finger and feel holier than thou. In fact, that was the thing that Jesus spent the most time criticizing, and the Pharisees was religious people who thought they were superior to others and looked down on others. Rather, Christianity is ultimately all about a person, Jesus Christ. And the claim of Christianity is uniquely this, that the whole purpose of Jesus' ministry was not to provide a self-help program, but to transform our very hearts. You see, Christianity is all about transformation. Unless something is done to transform our hearts, no amount of self-improvement will ever work. You see, every other religion, as we draw this to a close, every other religion is ultimately about trying to solve a problem that the French philosopher Blaise Pascal hundreds of years ago once noted. He said the problem is, all human beings, we have this problem that we can be angelic or monstrous. The human race has produced Mother Teresa, and it's also produced Adolf Hitler. He said the problem isn't that the problem is that we don't know what's good. The problem, said Pascal, is we perfectly well know what's good. We just don't seem to have the power to do it, and we consistently fall short. And it doesn't matter how much education or politics or healthcare or science. Human beings have a tendency of picking things up, weaponizing them, and using them for evil. And how then do we deal with this split in the human heart? The tendency we all have to be both good and evil. Well, all religions do agree on this. All religions agree there is a problem. All religions agree that human beings are messed up and broken. And then just about every other religion says the solution is rules and regulations. Here's a list of commandments, go and keep them. Here's a list of teachings, go master them. Here essentially is a ladder to heaven, and then by your own efforts, climb it and climb it and climb it. If you work hard enough, maybe you'll rise above the sort of morass of humanity, and you will perhaps get to God, whatever that looks like. In all that sense, all religions, I suppose, are the same, with one notable exception. See, Christianity says there's nothing we can do to fix the human heart. Human beings have been trying that for millennia, and it hasn't worked. We can't bridge the gap between us and God from our side, but he can bridge it from our side, hence John 3:16. In Jesus, God has reached out to us, offering us the chance of life, real life. And the challenge we have when it comes to the Christian faith is not whether we are clever enough or religious enough or moral enough. The question is whether we're humble enough to fall at the feet of Jesus and to recognize there's nothing we can do. We need his offer to rescue us. As C.S. Lewis, who we quoted earlier, put it, he says Jesus offers us something for nothing. He even offers us everything for nothing. In a sense, the whole Christian life consists in accepting that remarkable offer. That, my friends, is what's unique about Christianity when you contrast it with every other religion. It's Jesus Christ who is unique. But in conclusion, I think, one of the reasons why, back to where we began, that pluralism is so attractive, why so many people, I think, are drawn to it, is inherently, as human beings, we want to love and respect other people. And I meet many people who think it's not loving and respecting to disagree with somebody. But it's hugely important to remember, especially in this culture we live in, that's forgotten, I think, the difference between loving and respecting somebody and affirming everything they believe. It's important to remember that it's people who are equal, ideas are not. You see, love for all, love for those we disagree with, stands at the heart of Christianity. And it stands at the heart of Christianity because Jesus is the great leveler. Other religions may fall by the wayside, but other persons do not, because we are all equal, and what makes us equal is we all equally need Jesus. He didn't come to tell us how to live such moral lives we could feel smug and superior. Rather, in Jesus, God reached out to rescue us, transform us, and offer us acceptance and welcome into his family. And that offer is uniquely made through Jesus to every human being. And there is simply nobody else like him. And when someone says to me, why do I think that Jesus is unique? Sometimes I just simply turn the question around and say, who should I compare him with? Who should I compare him with? I don't know anybody else in history who said, I am the way, the truth, and the life, whose teaching and ministry then demonstrated those claims, and then finally was vindicated when he died on the cross in my place and rose from the grave 3 days later. There is no one like him, Jesus Christ, God's rescue plan. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, I thank you that you did not leave us as strangers and aliens and rebels. You could simply have looked down at the mess and brokenness we've made of the world, made of our lives, and the way we've damaged our relationship with you and with each other. You could have looked down and walked away, but you didn't. In Jesus, you stepped into history. You got your feet dirty with the dust of the world, your hands bloody with the nails of the world. And you did it for each one of us, and you did it for our friends and our neighbors and our classmates and our colleagues. And Lord, I pray that you would give us a heart and a compassion for those in our lives, our workmates, our friends, our family members, our neighbors who don't believe what we believe, whether they're atheists or agnostics or humanists or followers of a different faith. Give us a compassion, not an arrogance, but a compassion and a desire that they might find true life in and through you. And Lord, we also pray that you would give us then a boldness to begin conversations about faith with our friends. Lord, forgive us for the times when, even knowing these amazing truths about who Jesus is, we have sat on our hands and done nothing. Lord, would you send us out this evening as you sent Jesus out into this world, and would we go and be your ambassadors and your hands and your feet, knowing that we do it in the power of the Spirit and with incredible news of who Jesus is in our hearts and on our lips. In his name we pray.